I found the envelope when I got home from work. It was sitting there on the kitchen floor just inside the front door. White envelope, no stamp, no return address. Just my name written on the front. I picked it up and carried it to the kitchen. Didn't think much of it at first. Probably another notice from the HOA about my grass being too long or something. I tossed it on the counter while I grabbed a beer from the fridge. The kitchen light flickered like it always does. I needed to fix that. I'd been meaning to for months now. I twisted the cap off my beer and took a long drink before reaching for the envelope again. That's when I saw the handwriting. I almost dropped the bottle. My hands started shaking so bad, I had to set the beer down on the counter. I stared at my name written in that familiar, careful script. Ethel's handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. The way she made her capital C with that little extra loop, the slight tilt to the right. It couldn't be. Ethel had been dead for 3 years. I held the envelope up to the light, like that would tell me anything. Then I turned it over in my hands a few times, looking for, I don't know what. Some explanation, I guess. This isn't possible, I said out loud to my empty kitchen. I grabbed a knife from the drawer and carefully slit the envelope open. My hands were still shaking. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. I pulled it out and unfolded it. The note was short, just a few lines in the same handwriting as the envelope. Calvin, meet me at the old Kellerman factory at midnight. Come alone. I'll explain everything. E. At the bottom was a postscript. I know you won't believe this is me. Remember our first date? You wore that ridiculous blue tie with fish on it because you thought it would make me laugh. It did. I sat down hard on one of the kitchen chairs. Nobody knew about that tie except Ethel. I'd never told anyone that story. I checked the time. 10:43 p.m. A little over an hour until midnight. This had to be some kind of sick joke. Had to be. I'd identified Ethel's body myself after the accident. Her car had gone off the bridge during that storm. They'd pulled it from the river 2 days later. I remembered standing in that cold room at the morgue, nodding when they pulled back the sheet. That was her. My wife. Dead. I'd watched them lower her casket into the ground 3 days after that. I looked at the note again. Studied the handwriting, the way she made her M's with that curved first stroke, the slight hook at the end of each E. It was perfect. Exactly like Ethel wrote. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to copy her handwriting. But why? What was the point of luring me to an abandoned factory in the middle of the night? I should call the police. That's what any sane person would do. Or just ignore it completely. Tear up the note and forget about it. Instead, I found myself checking the time again. 10:51 p.m. The Kellerman factory was about a 20-minute drive from my house. It had been closed for years now. Some kind of chemical plant, I think. It was on the edge of town, surrounded by empty lots and forgotten buildings. This is crazy, I said to the empty room. I'm not going. But I was already grabbing my keys and jacket. I knew I was being stupid. This was obviously a trap or a prank or something. But what if it wasn't? What if, somehow impossibly, it really was Ethel? I couldn't not go. I got in my car and started driving. The streets were mostly empty this time of night, a few cars here and there, a couple of late-night restaurants still open. I drove on autopilot, my mind racing. What would I find at the factory? Best case scenario, nothing. Worst case? Well, I didn't want to think about that. But I kept driving anyway. The rational part of my brain kept screaming at me to turn around. Ethel was dead. I'd seen her body. I'd buried her. Whatever was waiting for me at that factory, it wasn't my wife. But I kept driving. The factory came into view as I turned onto the access road. It stood against the night sky like some massive shadow, all sharp angles and broken windows. The moonlight made the whole place look silver and ghostly. The main building was 4 stories of concrete and metal, with a couple of smaller structures off to the sides. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, but the gate hung open, the chain that once secured it lying broken on the ground. I pulled into what used to be the parking lot. The asphalt was cracked, with weeds growing through. I parked near the entrance and shut off the engine. It was 11:58 p.m. I sat there for a minute, listening to my car's engine tick as it cooled. The factory looked even more ominous up close. Most of the windows were broken. The walls were covered in graffiti. It was exactly the kind of place nobody in their right mind would go at midnight. That's when I noticed the white van parked about 50 feet away. I hadn't seen it when I pulled in. Its engine was making soft pinging noises. Recently driven. So someone else was here. I got out of my car and stood in the parking lot for a moment. The night was quiet, except for the occasional distant sound of traffic from the highway. A slight breeze made the broken metal sign above the factory entrance creak. "This is stupid," I said to myself. But I started walking toward the main entrance anyway. The front door of the factory was a heavy metal thing, hanging partially open on rusted hinges. A faded sign warned about trespassing and hazardous materials. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The air inside was stale and dusty. It smelled like rust and mold and something chemical I couldn't identify. Moonlight streamed through the broken windows and holes in the roof, casting long shadows across the floor. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing what had once been the main production floor. Huge machines sat covered in dust and cobwebs. Conveyor belts stretched across the room, frozen in time. Everything was exactly as it had been left when the factory closed, except covered in years of dust and decay. My footsteps echoed loudly as I walked further in. Each step kicked up little clouds of dust that danced in the beam of my flashlight. "Hello?" I called out. My voice bounced off the walls and came back to me, hollow and strange. "Anybody here?" No answer. I checked my watch. 12:03 a.m. I was here at midnight, just like the note said. But there was no sign of anyone else. I moved deeper into the factory, sweeping my light across the abandoned machinery. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, a steady plink 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 that seemed to match my heartbeat. "This was a mistake," I muttered. I was about to turn around and leave when I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. These were coming from behind me, from the direction of the entrance. Heavy boots on concrete. I turned around quickly, pointing my flashlight toward the sound. 3 figures stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the night sky. 2 men and a woman, from what I could tell. They were just standing there, watching me. "Hello?" I called out again. "Who's there?" They started walking toward me, spreading out slightly as they entered the main floor of the factory. None of them answered. I took a step back, suddenly very aware of how isolated this place was. How far from help. The note in my pocket felt like it was burning a hole through my jacket. The 3 strangers kept coming. I didn't move. Those 3 kept coming toward me, spreading out like they were trying to block any escape route. My phone's flashlight beam bounced between them, catching glimpses of hard faces and dark clothing. The tallest one stepped forward. He had a completely shaved head and cold eyes that sized me up like I was something to be dealt with, not talked to. "Calvin Powell," he said. Not a question. A statement. My stomach dropped. He knew my name. I hadn't told anyone I was coming here. "I'm Sawyer Clark," he continued, gesturing to his right. "This is Xavier Gutierrez." A wiry man with a permanent scowl nodded. Sawyer then pointed to his left. "And Shane Duncan." Shane was shorter but built like a bulldog. He stared at me with small, mean eyes, and I noticed his hand resting on something at his hip. "What are you doing here, Mr. Powell?" Sawyer asked. I didn't answer. My fingers found Ethel's note in my pocket, gripping it tight. The paper felt warm, almost hot. "I asked you a question," Sawyer said, his voice hardening. "What brings you to an abandoned factory in the middle of the night?" "I could ask you the same thing," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Xavier snorted. He's got balls, I'll give him that. Sawyer took another step forward. This place isn't safe. You shouldn't be here. Then why are you here? I shot back. Professional interest, Sawyer said with a thin smile. Now, I'll ask one more time. Why are you here? I didn't trust them. Not one bit. I tried moving toward the side, thinking maybe I could circle around them, get deeper into the factory. I'm just looking around, I said. Last I checked, being curious isn't a crime. At midnight, in an abandoned factory. Xavier stepped into my path, blocking me. Bullshit. I tried pushing past him, but he was stronger than he looked. He shoved me back, not hard enough to knock me down, but enough to make his point. Move, I said. Not until you tell us why you're really here, Sawyer said. My heart was hammering now. The note in my pocket seemed to pulse with each beat. I looked at their faces again, all strangers, all dangerous, and made a decision. My wife told me to come, I said finally. Sawyer's eyebrows went up. Your wife? Yes. And where is this wife of yours? I don't know, I admitted. I thought she might be here. Sawyer looked at his companions, and then he laughed. The sound echoed off the factory walls, hollow and mean. Nobody else is here, Mr. Powell. Just us. You don't know that, I said. Shane spoke for the first time, his voice raspy. Maybe he's with them. He pulled out a hunting knife, the blade catching the light from my phone. Maybe we should make sure. Put that away, Sawyer ordered, but his eyes never left mine. What do you mean your wife told you to come? How? I was backing away now, trying to create some distance between us. I got a note, I said. Today. A note, Sawyer repeated. From your wife. Yes. And you just came, all by yourself, in the middle of the night, because of a note. When he put it that way, it did sound crazy, but I knew what I'd seen. I knew Ethel's handwriting. Look, I said, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm not looking for trouble. I just need to look around. That's not going to happen, Sawyer said. We know who you are, Calvin Powell. We've been watching this place for weeks. People come in, they don't come out. What are you talking about? My voice cracked. What people? The desperate ones, Xavier said. The ones who get the messages. A chill ran down my spine. Messages? Like notes? Sometimes notes, Sawyer said. Sometimes phone calls. Sometimes they just know. But they all come here, looking for someone they've lost. I stared at him. How do you know about my wife? We make it our business to know, Sawyer said. Ethel Powell died 3 years ago. Car accident. Hearing her name from his mouth felt wrong, like a violation. I lunged forward without thinking, shoving past Xavier. Hey, he shouted, grabbing for me. I twisted away and ran deeper into the factory, away from the entrance, away from them. Their footsteps pounded behind me. Get him, Sawyer yelled. The main floor was a maze of old machinery and equipment. I ducked and weaved, my phone's flashlight bouncing wildly, casting crazy shadows everywhere. I heard them spreading out, trying to cut me off. I spotted a gap between two massive machines and squeezed through, scraping my shoulder on something sharp. I bit back a cry of pain and kept moving until I found a dark corner behind what looked like an old press. I crouched down, turned off my flashlight, and tried to control my breathing. Heavy footsteps approached, then stopped. A beam of light swept over the machinery, not quite reaching my hiding spot. Where'd he go? Xavier's voice. Spread out, Sawyer ordered. He's in here somewhere. Shane, take the east side. Xavier, check those offices. I'll work my way around the back. Their footsteps moved away in different directions. I stayed frozen in place, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. What the hell was happening? How did they know about Ethel? About the note? I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore, then carefully peered around the edge of the machine. In the dim light filtering through the broken windows, I could make out the shapes of the factory floor. About 20 yards away, I spotted a metal staircase leading up to a second level. Moving as quietly as I could, I crept toward it, stopping every few steps to listen. I heard Xavier's voice from somewhere to my right, then Shane's raspy reply from farther away. I couldn't make out what they were saying. I reached the stairwell and tested the first step with my weight. It creaked slightly but held. Taking a deep breath, I started climbing, placing each foot carefully, trying to distribute my weight to minimize noise. Halfway up, I froze. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness below, sweeping across the factory floor. I pressed myself against the wall, hoping the shadows would hide me. The light moved on, and I let out the breath I'd been holding. I continued climbing until I reached the second floor. It was a long corridor with offices on either side, their windows overlooking the factory floor below. Most of the doors were missing or hanging off their hinges. I moved down the corridor, checking each room as I passed. They were all empty. Desks gone, file cabinets tipped over, papers scattered and yellowed with age. The place had been picked clean years ago. At the end of the hall, I found a larger office, probably the manager's. Unlike the others, this one still had most of its furniture: a heavy desk, a filing cabinet, and a chair with the stuffing coming out. I stepped inside and immediately sensed something was different about this room. It wasn't just the furniture, there was a smell, metallic and familiar. I pulled out my phone and turned the flashlight back on, keeping my thumb ready to switch it off at the first sound of footsteps. The beam swept across the room, landing on the far wall. I froze in horror. Written there, in what looked like dried blood, were 3 words. "She's waiting." My blood turned to ice. The letters were large, maybe 2 feet tall, drawn with someone's finger in dark, rusty brown. They looked old, but not as old as everything else in this place. I stared at those words, unable to look away. She's waiting. She's waiting. Ethel. I heard breathing behind me, not my own. I spun around and there was Shane filling the doorway. His knife was raised, the blade catching the light from my phone. His eyes were fixed on me, not even blinking. "Found you," he said. I took a step back. My legs hit the edge of the desk. I glanced at the blood message on the wall, then back at Shane. He smiled, showing teeth. "Sawyer said to find you," he said. "Didn't say how I had to bring you back." He lunged at me fast. I tried to dodge, but there wasn't much room. His body slammed into mine and we crashed into the desk. It skidded across the floor with a metal screech. My phone flew from my hand, the light spinning across the ceiling before going dark. Shane was heavy. His weight pinned me against the desk edge, digging into my back. His breath hit my face in hot bursts. I grabbed his wrist, trying to keep the knife away, but he was strong. Too strong. "Get off me!" I yelled, pushing against his chest with my free hand. "Shut up," he growled. The knife inched closer. I strained against his arm, but he kept pushing. My muscles burned. The blade was maybe 6 inches from my face now. I twisted hard to the side. We both toppled over, hitting the floor. I landed on something hard that jabbed into my ribs. The impact loosened his grip for a second, and I rolled, trying to get away. I wasn't fast enough. Shane was on me again, grabbing my shirt and yanking me back. The knife came down. I threw my arm up to block it and felt a sharp, hot pain slice across my shoulder. "Shit!" I shouted. Warm wetness spread down my arm. Shane didn't pause. He climbed on top of me, knees pinning my arms. The knife hovered over my throat now. I bucked and thrashed, but couldn't throw him off. "Sawyer's gonna be mad," he said, "but I'll just tell him you made me do it." His arm tensed. I twisted desperately, my hand sliding across the floor. My fingers touched something sharp. Glass. A broken piece from a picture frame or maybe a window. I grabbed it, feeling it cut into my palm, and swung my arm up. The glass sank into the side of Shane's neck with a sound I'll never forget. Sort of a wet punch. His eyes went wide. The knife clattered to the floor beside my head. Shane made a gurgling noise and grabbed at his neck. Blood poured between his fingers, black in the darkness. He rolled off me, making choking sounds. I scrambled backward until my back hit the wall, watching him. Shane staggered to his feet, swaying. He took 2 steps toward the door before collapsing in the doorway. His body twitched and jerked. Then he went still. I sat there for what felt like forever, just breathing. My shoulder throbbed. I pressed my hand against it, feeling warm blood soaking my shirt. It hurt, but I didn't think it was too deep. My palm was cut too from the glass. "Shane, you find him?" Sawyer's voice echoed up from below. "What was that noise?" "Shane." Xavier this time. I needed to move. I pushed myself up, legs shaky, and stepped over Shane's body in the doorway. Blood was pooling under him. I looked away and moved into the hallway. "Shane, answer me." Sawyer again, closer now. I found the stairwell and started down, keeping my hand pressed to my shoulder. I tried to be quiet, but the metal steps creaked under my weight. Halfway down, I froze. Footsteps were coming from the main floor. I couldn't go back up. Shane was there. I couldn't go down. Sawyer and Xavier were there. I was trapped. "I think he's upstairs," Xavier said. Shane probably got him. I looked around desperately. There had to be another way out. The stairwell continued down past the main floor, maybe a basement. I started moving again, going down instead of up. At the bottom was a heavy door with peeling paint. I pushed it open and slipped through. The basement was even darker than upstairs. I fumbled for my phone but couldn't find it. Must have left it in the office with Shane. I moved forward slowly, hands outstretched, following the wall. The air was damp and musty. "Shane's not answering." Sawyer's voice filtered down from above. "Check upstairs." I needed to hurry. I kept moving, faster now despite the darkness. My eyes were adjusting a little. I could make out shapes, support pillars, old equipment. There had to be another exit. That's when I saw her. About 20 feet ahead, a figure stood motionless. A woman with long dark hair, wearing what looked like a white dress. She was just visible in the darkness, like a photograph negative. My heart stopped. "Ethel," I whispered. The figure turned and walked away, disappearing through a doorway. I followed without thinking. My feet moved on their own. The pain in my shoulder didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except reaching her. The doorway led to a corridor lined with pipes. Emergency lights glowed dimly at intervals, casting everything in sickly green. I could see her ahead, walking steadily away from me. "Ethel, wait!" I called, louder this time. She didn't stop. She turned a corner before I could catch up. I ran after her, my footsteps echoing. When I rounded the corner, she was already at the next turn, her white dress disappearing from view. "Please stop," I called. I followed her through turn after turn. She always stayed just ahead, never close enough for me to see her face clearly, just the dark hair and white dress. The corridors twisted and branched, forming a maze beneath the factory. I was lost now, but I didn't care. I just needed to catch up to her. The corridor widened into a large storage room. Metal drums lined the walls, their labels faded and peeling. The smell was sharp and chemical. I scanned the room for the white dress, but she was gone. "Ethel," I called, turning in a circle. A door slammed open on the other side of the room. Light beams cut through the darkness, blinding me. I raised my hand to shield my eyes. "There he is," Xavier shouted. Sawyer and Xavier burst through the doorway, their flashlights immediately finding me. I was caught in twin spotlights, nowhere to run. I stood there, caught in the beams of their flashlights like a deer about to get hit. My shoulder throbbed where Shane had cut me, blood still seeping through my fingers as I pressed against the wound. "Where's Shane?" Sawyer demanded, his flashlight beam steady on my face. I squinted against the light, saying nothing. What could I say? I just killed a man. The realization made my stomach turn. "I asked you a question," Sawyer said, taking a step closer. "Where's Shane?" Xavier swept his flashlight beam across the floor, catching the dark trail that led to my feet. "Boss," he said, his voice tight. "Look." The beam illuminated the small pool of blood that had formed where I stood. Some was mine from my shoulder, but most had dripped from my clothes. Shane's blood. Sawyer noticed it too. His eyes narrowed as he looked from the blood to my face. "What did you do?" "He attacked me," I said, my voice hoarse. "He had a knife." "Where is he?" Sawyer's voice rose, echoing off the metal drums around us. "Upstairs," I said. "In an office." Sawyer kept his flashlight trained on me while he pulled out a walkie-talkie. "Shane, come in." Static answered him. "Shane, report your position." More static. Xavier moved his flashlight beam up my body, stopping at my bloody shoulder and hand. "You're saying Shane cut you and then what? You got away." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Bullshit," Xavier spat. "Shane wouldn't let you get away." "Check upstairs," Sawyer ordered Xavier, his eyes never leaving me. Xavier hesitated. "You want me to leave you alone with him?" "I can handle one injured man," Sawyer said. "Go." Xavier backed toward the door, keeping his flashlight on me until he disappeared into the hallway. His footsteps echoed as he ran, growing fainter. Sawyer and I stood in silence, the only sound my ragged breathing and the distant drip of water somewhere in the room. I tried to think of a plan, but my mind kept circling back to Shane's body upstairs and the blood pooling beneath him. "Why are you here?" Sawyer asked finally. "The real reason." "I told you. My wife." "Your dead wife," he interrupted. "You expect me to believe you came here in the middle of the night because you got a note from your dead wife? I know how it sounds. You know what I think?" Sawyer took another step closer. "I think you're with them, the others who've been sneaking around here." Before I could answer, Xavier's voice echoed down the stairwell. "Sawyer, Sawyer, get up here." Sawyer's jaw tightened. "Stay right there," he ordered, backing toward the door but keeping his flashlight on me. "What is it?" he called back to Xavier. "He's gone." Xavier's voice was high, panicked. "Shane's not here." Sawyer froze. "What do you mean he's not there?" "I mean he's not fucking here," Xavier shouted. "There's blood everywhere, but Shane is gone." Sawyer's face changed, fear replacing anger. He looked at me differently now, like I might be something other than what he'd thought. "Check the other rooms," he called back. I did. "He's not up here." Heavy footsteps pounded down the stairs, and Xavier burst back into the room, breathing hard. His flashlight beam danced wildly across the walls before settling on me. "He's lying," Xavier said to Sawyer. "Shane's not up there." "I'm not lying," I said. "He was there, in the office with the desk." "There's blood all over that office," Xavier said. "But no Shane." Sawyer's flashlight beam dropped slightly as he processed this. "That's not possible." "I'm telling you, he's not there," Xavier insisted, his voice rising. "Just blood. A lot of blood." As Xavier spoke, I noticed something on the floor near his feet, a small puddle forming. At first I thought it might be water from a leaking pipe, but then I saw another drop fall from above. Xavier was standing directly beneath it. I looked up. "Oh God," I whispered. Suspended from the ceiling pipes was Shane's body, arms and legs splayed at impossible angles, head twisted completely backward. Blood dripped steadily from his slashed throat, forming the puddle below Xavier. Xavier saw my expression and followed my gaze upward. The scream that tore from his throat didn't sound human. He stumbled backward, slipping in the blood puddle and falling hard. "What the?" Sawyer swung his flashlight up and froze when the beam hit Shane's twisted body. The blood from Shane's throat was pooling faster now, spreading across the concrete floor toward us. Xavier scrambled to his feet, pulling a pistol from his waistband. "What the fuck did you do?" he screamed, aiming the gun at me. His hand shook so badly I doubted he could hit me, but at this distance it wouldn't matter. "I didn't do that," I said, backing up until I hit metal drums behind me. "He was on the floor when I left him. I swear." "You're dead," Xavier said, his finger tightening on the trigger. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered, ancient fluorescence buzzing to life after years of darkness. We all blinked against the sudden, harsh light, and there she was, standing in the center of the room. Ethel. My Ethel. She wore the same white dress she'd been buried in, her dark hair falling past her shoulders just like I remembered. Her face. God. Her face was exactly as it had been the last time I saw her alive. Not the pale, broken face from the morgue, but her face. Alive and perfect. Ethel, I whispered, unable to believe what I was seeing. She turned toward me and her eyes, those eyes I'd thought I'd never see again, found mine. She didn't speak, but a small smile touched her lips. "Who the fuck is that?" Xavier demanded, swinging his gun toward her. "Don't," I said, panic rising in my chest. "That's my wife." "Your dead wife?" Sawyer said, backing away from her. "That's not possible." But it was her. Unmistakably her. The way she held her head slightly tilted, the small mole near her left eyebrow, the slight asymmetry of her smile that I'd always found endearing. Details no one could fake. "Stay back!" Sawyer shouted at Ethel, pulling out his own gun. "Don't come any closer!" Ethel ignored him and took a step forward, then another, moving with the same graceful stride I remembered. "I said stay back!" Sawyer yelled, his voice cracking. Xavier didn't wait. He fired 3 shots in rapid succession, the sound deafening in the concrete room. I screamed, watching the bullets tear through Ethel's chest, but there was no blood, no impact. The bullets passed through her like she was made of fog, hitting the metal drums behind her with sharp pings. Ethel didn't even flinch. She kept walking, her eyes now fixed on Xavier, who stared at her in horror. "What the fuck?" Xavier fired again, emptying his clip into her. Each bullet passed through harmlessly. Ethel reached him and stopped, looking into his terrified eyes. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her hand and placed it on his chest, right over his heart. Xavier's scream cut off abruptly. His body went rigid, then began to convulse violently. The gun clattered to the floor as his arms flailed wildly. His eyes rolled back in his head, showing only whites, and foam bubbled at the corners of his mouth. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, Xavier collapsed in a heap at Ethel's feet, his body still twitching. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. This wasn't the Ethel I knew, my gentle, laughing Ethel who cried when we found a dead bird in our backyard. This was something else wearing her face. Sawyer backed away, fumbling at his belt. He pulled out a hunting knife, the blade catching the fluorescent light. "Get away from me," he said, his voice shaking as he held the knife out in front of him. Ethel turned from Xavier's still form and faced Sawyer. She moved toward him with the same calm, steady pace. "I'm warning you," Sawyer said, slashing the air between them. "Stay back." When she kept coming, he lunged forward with a desperate cry, driving the knife straight into her chest. The blade passed through her like she was made of mist, the momentum carrying Sawyer forward. He stumbled through her, turning with a look of pure terror on his face. I watched in horror, pressed against the metal drums, unable to reconcile the woman I loved with whatever this was. She looked like Ethel, moved like Ethel, but my Ethel couldn't do these things. My Ethel was buried in Oak Hill Cemetery. I'd watched them lower her casket into the ground. Ethel turned to face Sawyer again, who was now backed against the wall. "Please," he begged, dropping the knife. "Please don't." Ethel tilted her head, studying him the way she used to study particularly difficult crossword clues. "We were just doing our job," Sawyer said, sliding along the wall. "We were hired to keep people away from the factory. That's all." Ethel continued to approach him, unhurried. "The Brennan Corporation," Sawyer blurted out. "They paid us to watch the place, keep people out. They said people had been breaking in, that's all I know." Ethel paused at the name, and for a moment, something like recognition flickered across her face. "Please," Sawyer continued, sensing he might have found a way out. "We didn't know what was happening here. They just paid us to keep watch and report anyone who showed up, especially if they claimed to get messages from dead people." I pushed myself away from the drums. "The Brennan Corporation?" I asked. "What do they have to do with this place?" Sawyer's eyes darted to me, desperate for any connection that might save him. "They own it. Bought it last year. They've been sending security teams out here for months because people keep breaking in." "What people?" I demanded. "People like you," Sawyer said. "People who get messages from dead loved ones telling them to come here. It's been happening for months." I couldn't take my eyes off Ethel. She looked exactly like I remembered her, dark hair falling past her shoulders, those steady brown eyes that always saw right through me. But there was something different about her now. Her edges seemed to blur in the harsh factory light, like she wasn't completely there. Sawyer was still backed against the wall, knife in hand. His eyes kept darting between Ethel, me, and Xavier's motionless body on the concrete floor. "What are you?" he asked, his voice cracking. Ethel turned to him, her expression hardening. "I'm someone who knows what the Brennan Corporation did here." "I don't know what you're talking about," Sawyer said. 12 workers died in this factory." Ethel's voice echoed off the metal drums. "The Brennan Corporation covered up a chemical leak. They knew about the faulty valves, the contaminated groundwater. They falsified safety reports and buried the evidence." My stomach dropped. Ethel had been investigating corporate environmental violations before her accident. She'd mentioned Brennan a few times, but I hadn't connected it to this place. "And they killed me too," she continued, taking a step toward Sawyer, "when I got too close to exposing them." Sawyer shook his head. "Look, lady, I just work security. I don't know anything about—" "You know enough," Ethel cut him off. "You've been keeping people away. People like my husband who might discover the truth." Sawyer's eyes found mine. "I told you, we were hired to keep people out. That's all." "And what about the others?" Ethel asked. "The families of the workers who died here, the ones who came looking for answers after getting messages from their dead loved ones." Sawyer didn't answer. His hand tightened around the knife handle. "How many disappeared, Sawyer?" Ethel pressed. "How many never made it home?" "That wasn't me," he said, his voice barely audible. "That was Shane's thing. I just looked the other way." Ethel moved closer to him. "Looking the other way makes you complicit." Sawyer lunged with the knife again, but like before, it passed through her without effect. She reached out and placed her palm against his forehead. His body went rigid, eyes wide with terror. Then he started convulsing, just like Xavier had. The knife clattered to the floor as his arms jerked and his back arched unnaturally. After a few seconds, he collapsed in a heap, completely still. I pressed myself harder against the metal drums behind me, my injured shoulder throbbing. Blood had soaked through most of my sleeve now. Ethel turned to me. Her face softened. "I'm sorry you had to see that, Calvin," she said. "What did you do to them?" I asked. "I showed them the truth," she said. "Everything they helped cover up. Everything they were complicit in." She glanced at their bodies. Their minds couldn't handle it. I swallowed hard. "Ethel, I buried you 3 years ago. I watched them lower your casket into the ground." She nodded. "I know. I am dead, Calvin." "Then how?" "I couldn't rest," she said simply. "Not while the people who killed me were still free. Not while the truth was still buried." My legs felt weak. I slid down against the drums until I was sitting on the cold concrete floor. "Your car accident," I said. "It wasn't an accident." "No. They killed you because of what you were investigating, because of what you found here. Ethel knelt in front of me. I could see the floor through the bottom of her white dress. I needed you to see the truth. I needed someone I could trust to finish what I started. I reached out to touch her face, but my hand passed through her. The air where she was felt cold, like opening a freezer door. "Why now?" I asked. "It's been 3 years. They're planning to demolish the factory next month," she said. "They'll destroy all the evidence. This was my last chance." She stood and walked across the room to an old filing cabinet in the corner. I hadn't noticed it before. "Everything is in there," she said. "Everything I gathered before they killed me. Documents showing illegal chemical dumping dating back 15 years, internal memos about the faulty equipment, medical records of the workers who got sick, photographs of the contaminated water supply. It's all there on paper and backed up on USB drives." I pushed myself up, wincing at the pain in my shoulder, and walked over to the cabinet. The top drawer was locked. "The key is taped under the bottom drawer," Ethel said. I crouched down, found the key, and opened the top drawer. It was stuffed with folders, each one labeled meticulously in Ethel's handwriting. I pulled out the first one and flipped it open. Inside were photographs of dead fish floating in a creek, dated soil sample results showing high levels of toxins, and a map marking contamination zones that spread well beyond the factory grounds. "Jesus," I whispered. "There's more," Ethel said. "The second drawer has a list of names. Whistleblowers who were silenced. Some disappeared. Some had accidents, like me." I opened the second drawer. The first folder was labeled Casualties. Inside was a list of names, dates, and brief descriptions. Heart attack, suicide, drowning, car accident. 12 factory workers and 7 others who had investigated the site afterwards. Ethel's name was at the bottom of the list. "How did you compile all this after you—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "I didn't," she said. "Most of it I gathered before they killed me. I hid it here the day before my accident. The rest—" She paused. "The rest came from the others. The ones who died here. We've been waiting for someone who could take this information out." I looked back at Sawyer and Xavier, and they were stopping anyone from getting to it. Ethel nodded. "Take everything to Eric Williams." "The detective?" I asked. "The one who investigated your accident?" "He's one of the few honest cops left in this town," she said. "He suspected something wasn't right about my death, but he couldn't prove it. He's still looking. This will give him everything he needs." I found an empty box in the corner and started filling it with folders from both drawers. There were hundreds of pages of documents, dozens of photographs, and 5 USB drives, each in its own labeled envelope. "What happens now?" I asked as I worked. "What happens to you?" Ethel stood in the center of the room, watching me. "Now I can rest," she said. "Someone I trust knows the truth. Someone will finish what I started." I closed the box and picked it up, tucking it under my good arm. My shoulder was still bleeding, but less now. "Will I see you again?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "I don't think so, Calvin. This was all I was holding on to, making sure the truth came out." As I watched, she began to fade, becoming more transparent by the second. "I loved you," I said, my voice breaking. "I still do." "I know," she replied, her voice growing fainter. "That's why it had to be you." She was barely visible now, just the faintest outline of the woman I'd loved. "Goodbye, Calvin," she whispered. And then she was gone. I stood alone in the storage room with the box of evidence, 2 bodies on the floor, and the weight of what I needed to do next. I reached for Ethel, but my fingers passed through empty air. She was gone. Just like that. The space where she'd stood seconds ago was empty, like she'd never been there at all. "Ethel," I whispered to the empty room. No answer. just the hum of the old fluorescent lights overhead and the slow drip of something leaking from one of the metal drums. I stood there for a long minute, staring at the spot where she'd disappeared, the box of evidence heavy in my arms. My shoulder throbbed, reminding me I was still bleeding. I set the box down on one of the drums and checked my wound. The bleeding had slowed to a trickle, but my shirt was soaked through with blood. I'd need stitches, probably. I looked at the two bodies on the floor. Sawyer was sprawled against the wall, his eyes open and empty, staring at nothing. Xavier lay a few feet away, crumpled in a heap. Neither of them was moving. Neither of them would ever move again. My stomach turned. I'd never seen dead bodies before, except for Ethel at the funeral home, but that had been different. She'd been prepared, made up. These men looked wrong, unnatural, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. In the distance, I heard something. A wailing sound, faint at first, then growing louder. Sirens. Someone must have heard the gunshots when Xavier fired at Ethel. I didn't have much time. I grabbed the box of evidence and tucked it under my good arm. My injured shoulder protested as I moved toward the door. I took one last look at the room, at the place where Ethel had stood, at the bodies on the floor, and then I left. The corridors were confusing, but I followed the sound of the sirens, working my way back through the maze of hallways and stairwells. I passed the spot where Shane had attacked me, his blood still wet on the floor. I didn't look for his body. I didn't want to know where it was. I finally found my way to the main floor and pushed through the heavy metal door to the outside. The night air hit me like a slap, cool and fresh after the stale air of the factory. The sirens were closer now, maybe a few blocks away. I hurried to my car, fumbling with my keys. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped them twice before I managed to unlock the door. I set the box of evidence on the passenger seat and started the engine just as red and blue lights appeared at the entrance to the access road. I pulled out of the parking lot and turned in the opposite direction, away from the approaching police cars. I drove with my headlights off until I reached the main road, then turned them on and headed straight for the police station downtown. The streets were mostly empty this late at night. I checked the clock on the dashboard, 1:37 a.m. I'd been in that factory for less than 2 hours, but it felt like days. My shoulder ached, and my head was swimming with everything that had happened. Ethel, the evidence, the men who died. I parked in front of the police station and grabbed the box. Walking through those doors was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The fluorescent lights inside were harsh after the darkness, and I blinked as my eyes adjusted. A desk sergeant looked up as I approached, his eyes widening at the sight of me. I must have looked terrible, bloody, pale, clutching a box of papers. "I need to speak to Detective Eric Williams," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hoarse and unsteady. "Sir, you're bleeding," the sergeant said, standing up. "Do you need medical attention?" "I need to speak to Detective Williams," I repeated. "It's urgent." The sergeant picked up his phone and made a call, his eyes never leaving me. I stood there, swaying slightly, the box getting heavier by the second. A door opened, and a tall man with thinning reddish-brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses stepped out. He looked tired, like he'd been working late. He saw me and frowned. "I'm Detective Williams," he said, approaching cautiously. "What can I do for you?" "My name is Calvin Powell," I said. "My wife was Ethel Powell. She was investigating the Brennan Corporation before she died." Something changed in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or interest. "Come with me," he said, holding the door open. I followed him through a maze of desks to a small interview room. He gestured for me to sit, and I set the box on the table between us. "You're hurt," he said, eyeing my bloody shoulder. "It's not as bad as it looks," I lied. "This is more important." I pushed the box toward him. "This is everything Ethel collected about the Brennan Corporation. evidence of illegal chemical dumping, falsified safety reports, and the deaths of at least 12 workers at the Kellerman factory. Williams opened the box and pulled out a folder, flipping through it with a frown. "Where did you get this?" "The factory," I said. "Tonight." He looked up sharply. "The factory where we just got reports of gunshots?" I nodded. "There are 3 men there: Sawyer Clark, Xavier Gutierrez, and Shane Duncan. They worked security for Brennan. They were keeping people away from the factory, making sure no one found this." I tapped the box. "And how did you find it?" Williams asked, his eyes narrowing. I hesitated. I couldn't tell him about Ethel's ghost. He'd think I was crazy or lying. "I got a note," I said, finally. "Someone sent me a note telling me to go to the factory tonight. When I got there, those men were waiting. They attacked me. Shane Duncan came at me with a knife." I gestured to my shoulder. "I defended myself." "You killed him?" Williams asked. "It was self-defense," I said. "He would have killed me. The others, I don't know what happened to them. I found them like that when I went back to the storage room where the evidence was kept." Williams was silent for a long moment, studying me. I couldn't read his expression. "You're saying you went to an abandoned factory in the middle of the night because of an anonymous note, were attacked by 3 security guards, killed 1 in self-defense, and then just happened to find a box of evidence implicating the Brennan Corporation in multiple crimes." When he put it like that, it sounded ridiculous, but it was as close to the truth as I could get without mentioning Ethel. "Yes," I said. "That's what happened." Williams sighed and stood up. "Wait here," he said, taking the box with him as he left the room. I sat alone for what felt like hours. My shoulder had stopped bleeding, but it hurt like hell. I was exhausted, running on empty. I closed my eyes for just a second. The door opening jerked me awake. Williams returned with a paramedic and another detective. "Mr. Powell, this is Detective Chen," Williams said. "She's going to take your formal statement while the paramedic looks at your shoulder." The next few hours were a blur. The paramedic cleaned and bandaged my wound, saying I'd need stitches at the hospital. Detective Chen asked me detailed questions about what happened at the factory, and I told my story again, sticking to the same version I'd given Williams. Meanwhile, police units had been dispatched to the factory. Williams came back with updates as the night went on. They'd found Sawyer and Xavier in the storage room, just as I'd said. Both dead from what appeared to be heart attacks, though the medical examiner would have to confirm. They'd also found Shane's body stuffed in an air duct on the 2nd floor, his throat cut. The knife was found nearby, covered in both his blood and mine. By morning, I was exhausted. They'd taken my clothes for evidence and given me a police department t-shirt and sweatpants to wear. I'd been photographed, fingerprinted, and questioned repeatedly. But they didn't arrest me. The evidence in the box was too compelling, and my story of self-defense was consistent with the physical evidence they'd found. Williams came to see me one last time before I left. "The DA is reviewing the evidence," he said, "but it looks like you were telling the truth about the Brennan Corporation. We've already got warrants for 6 of their executives." I nodded, too tired to speak. "What I don't understand," Williams continued, "is how you knew where to find that evidence. The note you mentioned. Do you still have it?" "No," I said. "I lost it at the factory." Williams studied me for a long moment. "Your wife was investigating Brennan before she died, wasn't she? That car accident. I always thought it was suspicious." I met his gaze. "Yes," I said. "She was. And now, 3 years later, you just happened to find the evidence she was looking for?" I didn't answer. What could I say? Williams sighed. "The Brennan Corporation has been operating for over 20 years. This evidence shows at least 15 years of criminal activity. illegal chemical disposal, falsified environmental reports, and now, it seems, the murders of whistleblowers who tried to expose them, including, possibly, your wife. I thought about Ethel's name in that folder labeled Casualties. My throat tightened. "I'm going to need you to come back tomorrow," William said. "We'll have more questions." "I'll be here," I promised. As I walked out of the police station into the morning sunlight, I felt both lighter and heavier than I had in years. The truth about Ethel's death was finally going to come out. The people responsible would face justice. But Ethel was gone. Really gone this time. And I was left with the memory of her face as she faded away, telling me she loved me, but that I needed to let her go. Over the next few weeks, the case against the Brennan Corporation exploded. The evidence Ethel had collected led to the arrest of 6 executives and revealed 15 years of criminal cover-ups. The story made national news. Illegal chemical disposal, falsified safety reports, murdered whistleblowers. It was bigger than anyone had imagined. Detective Williams questioned me repeatedly about what happened at the factory. He knew there was more to my story than I was telling him, but I stuck to my version. The note, the attack, finding the evidence. Self-defense against Shane Duncan. No explanation for the deaths of Sawyer and Xavier beyond finding them that way. Heart attacks don't happen simultaneously to 2 healthy men in their 30s and 40s, Williams said during one interview. "What really happened in that room, Calvin?" "I told you everything I know," I said, and in a way, it was true. I still didn't understand what Ethel had done to them or how. I just knew she had shown them the truth, and their minds couldn't handle it. Williams never seemed satisfied with my answers, but he couldn't disprove my story. The physical evidence supported what I'd told him, as far as it went, and the evidence against Brennan was too important to ignore over inconsistencies in my account. The case moved forward. Indictments were handed down, trials were scheduled. Justice, slow but certain, began to take shape. I watched the trial coverage on my laptop, the blue light casting shadows across my living room. 3 months had passed since that night at the Kellerman factory. The news anchor announced the guilty verdict for all 6 Brennan executives. I closed the laptop and sat back on my couch. I'd testified twice during the trial. Both times I stuck to the same story. I'd received an anonymous tip about documents hidden in the factory, went to investigate, and was attacked by security guards. I never mentioned Ethel. Never said a word about my dead wife appearing before me or showing me where to find the evidence. The jury didn't need ghost stories to convict. The evidence spoke for itself. I got up from the couch and walked to the fireplace. The house felt emptier these days, even though Ethel had been gone for years before that night. I reached into my pocket and pulled out her note, the one that had started everything. I'd kept it folded in my wallet since that night, unable to throw it away but afraid to look at it too often. I unfolded it carefully, running my thumb over her handwriting. The paper had softened from being carried so long, the creases worn thin. The words were still clear. "Meet me at the old Kellerman factory, midnight, come alone." And then her signature. Just an E with that distinctive curl she always used. The postscript about the blue tie I'd worn on our first date was there too, the detail only she would have known. I knelt by the fireplace and struck a match, watching the small flame dance for a moment before touching it to the corner of the note. The paper caught quickly, the edges blackening and curling inward. I held it by the corner until the heat reached my fingers, then dropped it onto the grate where it continued to burn. "Goodbye, Ethel," I whispered as the last of her words disappeared into ash. I watched until there was nothing left but a small pile of gray flakes. It seemed right, somehow. She had reached across death itself to make sure justice was served. To make sure the truth about Brennan came out. To protect me one last time. I stood up and winced. My shoulder still bothered me when I moved too quickly. The doctor had done a good job with the stitches, but he said, I'd always have a scar. 17 stitches worth of reminder. I rolled my shoulder slowly, feeling the pull of the healing tissue. You should have that looked at again. Williams had told me last week when I'd stopped by the station to sign some additional paperwork. Looks like it's healing rough. It's fine, I'd said, just a scar now. Williams had nodded, but I could tell he was still trying to piece together what had really happened that night. The physical evidence supported my story. Shane's knife had my blood on it, and my fingerprints were on the piece of glass found embedded in his neck. But Williams knew I wasn't telling him everything. He just couldn't prove it. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. Through the window, I could see the for sale sign in the front yard. The realtor had called that morning. She had a couple interested in the house, wanted to bring them by tomorrow. I'd agreed without hesitation. I couldn't stay here anymore. Too many memories. Too many nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if Ethel would appear again. Too many mornings waking up and remembering all over again that she was gone, had been gone for years, except for that one impossible night. I'd already found a small place in Oregon, a town I'd never been to, where nobody knew me or Ethel or anything about the Brennan case. I'd given notice at work 2 weeks ago. My boss hadn't seemed surprised. "You've been through a lot," he'd said. "Sometimes a fresh start is the best thing." The moving company was coming in 3 days. Most of my stuff was already in boxes stacked in the spare room. I wasn't taking much, just clothes, some books, my laptop. I'd sold or donated most of the furniture. It felt good to let it all go. I ran my fingers over the scar on my shoulder. It was raised in pink, a jagged line about 4 inches long. The doctor said it would fade eventually, but would always be visible, a permanent reminder of that night. I didn't mind. I wanted to remember. Not the fear or the blood or the bodies, but the moment I saw Ethel again. The moment I knew that what we'd had was real enough to reach beyond death. My phone rang, startling me. The screen showed Date Williams. I hesitated, then answered. "Powell," I said. "It's Williams. Thought you'd want to know. Sentencing came down for Brennan and the others. 25 years for Brennan himself, 15 to 20 for the rest." "Good," I said. "That's good. The families of those factory workers are filing civil suits now. Looks like they might actually get some justice." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. That's what this was all about. There was a pause on the line. "You know, Powell, I've been doing this job for 22 years. Seen a lot of cases, talked to a lot of witnesses. Most people, when they're lying, I can tell." I didn't say anything. "You never lied to me," Williams continued. "Not exactly, but you never told me the whole truth either, did you?" I looked out the window again, at the darkening sky. "I told you what happened." "You told me what I needed to know to make the case," Williams said, "and I appreciate that. But someday, if you ever want to tell me the rest—" "There is no rest," I said. "Just what I told you." Williams sighed. "All right. Well, I just wanted to let you know about the sentencing. And to say goodbye, I guess. Your realtor called for a reference check for your new landlord. Said you're moving to Oregon." "Yeah," I said. "Time for a change." "I understand," Williams said, though I knew he didn't, not really. "Take care of yourself, Powell." "You too," I said and hung up. The next 3 days passed in a blur of final packing, paperwork, and goodbyes to the few neighbors I actually knew. I signed the papers with the realtor, handed over the keys, and walked through the empty house one last time. I stood in the kitchen where I'd found Ethel's note that night, months ago, where everything had started. I half expected to feel something. Her presence, maybe, but there was nothing. Just an empty house that had once been a home. My truck was packed and ready in the driveway. I locked the front door behind me, walked to the truck, and didn't look back as I drove away. The drive to Oregon took 4 days. I didn't rush. I stayed in cheap motels, ate at roadside diners, and kept the radio off. I needed the quiet, the time to think. By the time I crossed the Oregon state line, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd left something behind besides just a house and a job. My new place was small, just a one-bedroom apartment above a bookstore in a town so small it didn't even have a stoplight. The landlady, Mrs. Chen, showed me around and handed me the keys with a smile. "It's not much," she said, "but it's quiet. And the bookstore downstairs makes the whole building smell nice." "It's perfect," I told her and meant it. I unpacked my few boxes and set up my laptop on the small desk by the window. The view was nothing special, just the main street of the town, a few shops, trees in the distance. But it was new. It was mine. That night, I got an email from Williams with a link to a news article. "Brennan corruption case makes national headlines," the title read. There was a picture of the Brennan executives being led away in handcuffs and quotes from the judge about corporate accountability. Williams hadn't written anything in the email, just sent the link. I read the article twice, then closed my laptop. I made a simple dinner and ate it standing by the window, watching the few people who walked by on the quiet street below. None of them knew who I was. None of them had heard of Calvin Powell or Ethel Powell or the Brennan Corporation. Here, I was just the new guy in apartment 2B. I finished eating and washed my plate, then got ready for bed. The apartment was still unfamiliar, the sounds different from my old house. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and settling noises of the old building. And then I felt it, a warmth that seemed to spread across my chest. Not physical exactly, but real all the same. I'd felt it a few times since that night at the factory, always when I was alone, always when I was thinking about her. "Ethel," I whispered to the dark room. The warmth intensified for a moment, like a hand pressed gently against my heart. Then it faded slowly, leaving behind a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. I closed my eyes and slept better than I had in months. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new life. I found a job at a local hardware store. I explored the town and the surrounding forests. I started to recognize faces, learn names. No one asked too many questions about where I'd come from or why I'd moved. Williams sent occasional updates about the case. The story had grown beyond just the Brennan executives. It had exposed a network of corporate corruption that reached into local government. More arrests were made. More families found justice. I never told anyone what really happened that night at the Kellerman factory. Not the full truth. Who would believe me? Who would understand that my wife, 3 years dead, had appeared before me? That she had reached across whatever barrier separates life from death to finish what she'd started in life. But I knew. And on certain nights, when the apartment was quiet and my thoughts turned to her, I'd feel that familiar warmth, that gentle pressure that told me she was still there. Somehow. That love, like truth, could transcend even death. I kept the supernatural parts to myself, but I carried the truth with me as I built my new life, one quiet day at a time. I kept the TV on while I made dinner, half listening to the news. They were covering the Brennan case again, this time focusing on the civil lawsuits filed by families of the factory workers. The reporter stood outside the courthouse, microphone in hand. In what legal experts are calling an unprecedented settlement, the Brennan Corporation has agreed to pay $50 million to the families of workers who died due to chemical exposure at the Kellerman factory. This comes just months after 6 Brennan executives were sentenced to prison terms ranging from 15 to 25 years for criminal negligence, fraud, and obstruction of justice. I turned off the burner under my pasta and moved to the living room to hear better. The evidence that broke this case came from documents discovered at the abandoned factory by Calvin Powell, whose late wife Ethel Powell had been investigating the corporation before her death 3 years ago in what was ruled a car accident. Questions have since been raised about whether Mrs. Powell's death may have been connected to her investigation. I winced at hearing our names. It had been 8 months since I left my old life behind, but the case was still making headlines. I grabbed the remote and turned off the TV. I didn't need to hear any more. My phone buzzed with a text. It was Williams. Saw the news. Thought you might want to know they're reopening investigation into Ethel's accident. New evidence suggests brake line was tampered with. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me had always suspected Ethel's accident wasn't really an accident, especially after what I learned at the factory that night. But seeing it confirmed like this, it brought everything back. I texted back. Thanks for letting me know. Williams replied immediately. You doing okay out there in Oregon? Yeah, I wrote. Getting by. I put the phone down and went back to the kitchen. The pasta water had boiled over, making a mess on the stove. I cleaned it up, my mind elsewhere. I thought about Ethel's note, now nothing but ash in my old fireplace. I thought about her face that night at the factory, how real she had looked, how alive, even though I knew she wasn't. After dinner, I sat on my small balcony with a beer, looking out at the main street of my new town. It was quiet here, peaceful. Nobody knew about my past, about the factory, about Ethel. Here, I was just Calvin, the new guy who worked at the hardware store. I rubbed my shoulder absently. The scar was still pink and raised, a permanent reminder of that night. Shane's knife had cut deeper than I'd initially thought. The doctor said I was lucky, a little deeper, and it would have hit something important. As it was, I had limited mobility in that arm now. The hardware store manager had been understanding, giving me tasks that didn't require heavy lifting. I finished my beer and went inside. My apartment was small but comfortable. I'd bought new furniture, nothing fancy, just the basics. Nothing from my old life except a few books and clothes. And one photo of Ethel I kept on my nightstand, her smiling on our honeymoon, hair blowing in the wind on some beach. It was the only picture I'd brought with me. I picked up the photo now, looking at her face. They know, I said quietly. They know what Brennan did to you. I set the photo down and got ready for bed. As I lay there in the dark, I felt that familiar warmth spread across my chest. It wasn't imagination or wishful thinking. It was real as anything I'd ever felt. Ethel was still with me, somehow. Good night, I whispered to the empty room and closed my eyes. The next morning at the hardware store was busy. A storm was coming, and everyone in town was preparing, buying flashlights, batteries, candles, the usual emergency supplies. I was at the register, ringing up a middle-aged woman buying enough batteries to power a small city when my boss called me over. Calvin, phone call for you, he said, holding out the store's cordless phone. Says it's important. I frowned, taking the phone. Nobody called me at work. Hello? Mr. Powell, this is Andrea Martinez from the Portland Tribune. I'm writing a feature on the Brennan case, and I was hoping to get a statement from you about... No comment, I said, and handed the phone back to my boss. Reporter, I explained, about that case I was involved in before I moved here. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. I'd been vague about my past when I applied for the job, but he'd seen the news. He knew enough. Take your break early, if you want, he offered. I can cover the register. I nodded gratefully and headed to the back room. My hands were shaking slightly. It had been months since a reporter had tracked me down. I thought I'd left all that behind. I sat on a stack of boxes and took a few deep breaths. The back room smelled like sawdust and paint, a smell I'd come to find comforting over the past months. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to center myself. When I opened them, my phone was buzzing in my pocket. Unknown number. I declined the call. It buzzed again immediately. Another unknown number. I declined that one too. They'd found me. Again. By the end of my shift, I had 17 missed calls from various unknown numbers and a handful of voicemails from reporters asking for interviews. I deleted them all without listening and walked home, hood up against the rain that had started to fall. Mrs. Chen was sweeping the sidewalk in front of the bookstore when I arrived. "More packages came for you," she said, pointing to a stack of envelopes by the door to my apartment stairs. "Looks like fan mail." I forced a smile. "Thanks, Mrs. Chen." I gathered up the envelopes, all addressed to Calvin Powell, apartment 2B, with no return addresses, and headed upstairs. I knew what they were without opening them. Letters from families of the factory workers, thanking me for bringing the truth to light. I'd been getting them for months, forwarded from my old address. I kept them all in a box under my bed, unable to throw them away, but not wanting to read them either. I set the new letters on the kitchen counter and took a shower, letting the hot water ease the tension in my shoulders. When I got out, I checked my phone again. 5 more missed calls. I turned the phone off and tossed it on my bed. I made a simple dinner and ate it standing by the window, watching the rain. The storm was picking up, wind driving the rain sideways against the glass. The street below was empty now, everyone safely inside. After dinner, I picked up one of the letters from the counter. The envelope was plain white, no return address. I slid it open with a knife and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Dear Mr. Powell," it began, "you don't know me, but my father worked at the Kellerman factory for 20 years. He died of cancer when I was 12. The doctors could never explain what caused it. Now we know. I wanted to thank you for bringing the truth to light. My mother can finally have some closure. We all can." It was signed, Maria Gutierrez. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope, then added it to the box under my bed with all the others. I'd never answered any of them. I wouldn't know what to say. That I hadn't done it for them. That I'd only gone to that factory because I thought impossibly that my dead wife had summoned me. The truth was, I'd stumbled into doing the right thing for the strangest of reasons. I wasn't a hero. I was just a man who missed his wife. The storm raged outside, rain pounding against the windows. I turned on the small TV in the living room for company, keeping the volume low. They were still talking about the Brennan case on the news. I changed the channel to an old movie I'd seen a dozen times and settled on the couch. The power flickered once, twice, then went out completely. The TV died, leaving the apartment in darkness. I sat still for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room briefly, followed by a crash of thunder that seemed to shake the building. I got up and felt my way to the kitchen, where I kept emergency supplies in a drawer. I found a flashlight and clicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. I set it on the counter, pointing up to create ambient light, and rummaged through the drawer for candles. As I set up candles around the apartment, I felt that now familiar warmth spread across my chest. Ethel. I paused, a match held above an unlit candle. "You're here," I said quietly. The warmth intensified, like a hug from behind. I closed my eyes, letting myself feel it fully. It wasn't scary anymore. It was comforting, knowing she was still with me somehow. I lit the candle and moved to the next one. "The case is everywhere again," I told the empty room. "They're reopening the investigation into your accident. Williams thinks they'll find proof it was Brennan." The warmth remained steady, wrapping around me like a blanket. I continued talking as I moved around the apartment, lighting candles. "I'm doing okay here. It's quiet. People are nice. The job at the hardware store isn't exciting, but it pays the bills." I paused. "I miss you. Every day." I finished lighting the candles and sat on the couch, the apartment now filled with a warm, flickering glow. Outside, the storm continued to rage, rain lashing against the windows, wind howling around the corners of the building. "I never told anyone what really happened that night," I said, "about seeing you. They'd think I was crazy." I laughed softly. Maybe I am. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. But I knew I hadn't. The warmth around me was too real, too present. And there was the evidence. The documents that had put 6 Brennan executives in prison. I couldn't have found those on my own. Lightning flashed again, thunder following almost immediately. The storm was right overhead now. I leaned back on the couch, watching the candle flames dance in the darkness. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone to the factory that night, I said. If I'd thrown away your note, if I'd called the police instead of going alone. The warmth around me seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat. I know, I said, smiling slightly. You knew I'd come. You knew I couldn't not come. And she had been right. From the moment I saw her handwriting on that envelope, there was never any question of what I would do. I would always go to her, no matter what. The storm began to ease, the time between lightning and thunder growing longer. I felt myself getting drowsy, the warmth around me like a lullaby. I stretched out on the couch, too comfortable to move to the bedroom. "Good night, Ethel," I murmured as I drifted off to sleep. I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a clear, bright morning. The candles had burned out, wax pooled in their holders. I sat up, stretching, my neck stiff from sleeping on the couch. The warmth was gone, but I didn't feel alone. I never did anymore. I got up and made coffee, then turned my phone back on. 23 missed calls and a text from Williams. "Reporters found you, huh? Sorry about that. News travels fast." I texted back, "It's fine. They'll lose interest eventually." I showered and dressed, then headed downstairs. Mrs. Chen was outside the bookstore, cleaning up branches and leaves left by the storm. "Quite a night," she called when she saw me. "Power's still out on the north side of town." I helped her clear the debris, then walked to the hardware store. The town was busy with people assessing storm damage and making repairs. At the store, we were sold out of tarps and roofing supplies by noon. During my lunch break, I checked my phone again. Williams had sent another text. "Official now. Brennan ordered the hit on Ethel. Former security chief confessed as part of plea deal." I stared at the message, a mix of emotions washing over me. Vindication, grief, anger. And underneath it all, a strange sense of peace. I'd known somehow since that night at the factory. Hearing it confirmed didn't change anything, not really. I texted back, "Thanks for letting me know." The rest of the day passed in a blur. After my shift, I walked home slowly, taking a longer route through the town park. The storm had knocked down a few small trees, and crews were cutting them up and clearing them away. I sat on a bench and watched them work, my mind elsewhere. Ethel had been murdered. The car accident that took her life had been planned, executed on the orders of men who now sat in prison cells. Men who would be there for decades. Justice. It was what Ethel had wanted, what she had reached beyond death to achieve. For the factory workers, for herself, for the truth. I thought about the note I'd burned in my fireplace months ago, the note that had started everything. I wondered if she'd known, even then, how it would all play out, if she'd seen the whole picture from whatever place she now existed. I got up from the bench and continued home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. A beautiful evening after the storm. When I reached my apartment, there was another package waiting for me. A small box this time, not an envelope. I picked it up and carried it upstairs, setting it on the kitchen counter while I made dinner. After I'd eaten, I opened the box. Inside was a small, leather-bound notebook and a note from Williams. "Found this in Ethel's old desk at the newspaper office," the note read. "Thought you should have it." I picked up the notebook carefully. The leather was worn, the edges of the pages yellowed with age. I opened it to the first page and recognized Ethel's handwriting immediately. "Brennan Investigation," the heading read. Day 1. It was her journal from the investigation. Her notes, her thoughts, her discoveries. The investigation that had ultimately cost her life. I turned the pages, slowly, reading her words. Her voice was so clear in the writing, precise, determined, passionate about uncovering the truth. I could almost hear her speaking the words as I read them. Hours passed as I sat at my kitchen table, reading. By the time I reached the final entry, dated 3 days before her accident, it was well past midnight. The last words she'd written were, "Close now. Have evidence linking Brennan directly to chemical dumping. Meeting source tomorrow for final documents." She never got those documents. She never finished her investigation. But somehow, impossibly, she had finished it after death. Through me. I closed the notebook and held it against my chest. The familiar warmth spread through me, stronger than ever. "I love you," I whispered to the empty room. The warmth pulsed once, twice, like a heartbeat, like an answer. I went to bed that night with the notebook on my nightstand next to her photo. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt at peace for the first time in years. The truth was out. Justice had been served. Ethel could rest now. And maybe, finally, so could I. The warmth stayed with me all night, a gentle presence watching over me as I slept. When I woke the next morning, it was still there, fainter, but present. A reminder that love, like truth, could transcend even death. I had survived to carry that truth. And while I kept the supernatural aspects to myself, I carried them too. A secret knowledge that gave meaning to my new life. One quiet day at a time.